Welcome to Tennis Spin, where we put our spin on your tennis. Today, I'm going to be answering an interesting question. One of the viewers named Alexander Buff asked me a question about various rackets coming out the fall that he just tried and how different they are, but how much the same they are, but how the stringing really affects how they play. So it's an interesting question. Stay tuned. So Alexander writes, assuming a person has perfect technique and pro-level experience when trying to find a racket that best fits a person's play style, do the strings or the actual racket frame make a bigger impact on how the racket feels or performs? That's a good question, actually. It seems like every company now has their own version of a pure drive. I've talked about that a lot. So does the frame make that big of a difference if the stats are so similar, or do the strings really make certain frames stand out from the rest of the crowd? That's a great question too. So I'm going to go into a second part of the question in a minute, but yes is the answer. So each individual brand of racket has their own signature feel. I mean, I grew up with Wilson, so I'm kind of used to that Wilson feel, like the feedback it gives me. So definitely racket feel has a lot to do with it. I mean, we all in the tennis industry use the same buzzwords, you know, power, right? Which racket doesn't have power? Control, which racket doesn't have control, right? Spin, which racket doesn't help shape the ball with spin? So it really comes down to a few minor things in a racket. First is, right, feel. Feel is the one thing that we can define a particular brand or a particular racket to, as well as the grip shape. If you're used to a certain grip shape, very important, because I'm used to a square grip shape. We know head in a lot of the rackets are more rectangular. Yonex is kind of somewhere in between. So that actually equates to some of the feel too. So feel from the racket, feel from the actual grip alters a lot of what you're used to and what you possibly like. So the second part of that question was, does string alter the racket too? Well, definitely yes. If you play with a crappy string or never string, of course it's gonna play like crap, right? So new strings, high quality strings is gonna definitely improve the experience of any tennis racket. You can probably make I don't want to say a $39.99 racket feel good, but you can definitely improve it, you know, with a quality string job. So I'm going to actually go into the second half of his question now. So this is what he calls his explanation. With all the new rackets coming out this fall, I've decided to try a few. Pure Drive, Technifiber T-Fight 300, Dunlop FX 500, Yonex E-Zone 98, etc. And the place I got the demos from strung everything with Wilson synthetic gut. I was expecting a lot more from the Pure Drive and others based on the universal hype, but felt kind of let down with this because of the string used, since I'm used to my Gravity Tour with Hyper G, or were these other rackets as a whole not for me and my redeveloping game. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to test this myself, as I don't have have a way to try each racket with the string of my choice, but I know in your videos you tend to really like to test the frame by sticking with, yeah, my confidential at 48, since it's the best home base for you. Any insight would be awesome. Greatly appreciated, Alexander Buff. All right, so that brings up a lot of interesting perspectives. I know that a lot of tennis shops just throw like a basic synthetic in all the demo rackets. I mean, it gives you a good gauge of what the racket's gonna feel like, but it won't give you, let's say, the perfect gauge. When you throw like a Wilson synthetic gut in there or a Prince synthetic gut in there and string it at the mid-tension, I mean, it's kind of wonderful for that beginner or somebody who's been out of the game for 10 or 20 years. They kind of don't know any better. So, I mean, pretty much as long as it's a good racket, it's, you know, it's not going to matter a whole lot. 30 years ago, you know, Wilson synthetic gut, Prince synthetic gut was the industry standard. I mean, we pretty much strung 90% of rackets with that string. I call that the Wonder Bread of strings. I mean, no frills, you know, it is what it is. But 30 years ago, I mean, that was 30 years ago. We should leave it back then. A lot more technology in strings and advancements in strings have progressed since then. And, you know, we're all more knowledgeable about that stuff now. So pretty much everything's going to play better than that. But if I were you, Alexander, try those rackets the way they were or the way they are, and see if you can, you know, pick out, you know, the gem for you, and then see if maybe string it with the Hyper G at your tension and see how that feels. I mean, I know it's a process, and I know it's not going to feel wonderful with that synthetic gut in there, just because there's nothing special about the string. But that would be the way to do it. It's not going to make it feel wonderful. That's just how it is when they do it that way. So that's one way to kind of just throw a demo out there. I mean, I personally put like at least a head velocity or a gamma TNT or something better out there, depending on what the racket is. Like, I just got a bunch of pure drives in. I'll string one with a velocity straight up. I'll string one with a hybrid poly and a velocity on the cross possibly, and then I'll do one with a full bed of poly, and then kind of gauge it from there. But at least, you know, I think those definitely would enhance the playability of those rackets and kind of give the prospective, you know, buyer a truer, you know, sense of how it's going to really play when they own it. But that's just me. Most people, they just throw synthetic gut in there and call it a day, unfortunately. But like I said, pick the one you want, throw some Hyper G in there, and see how you like it with the Hyper G. That's just my recommendation. All right. So thank you, Alexander, for your question. I hope that helped you out. Thank you for watching Tennis Spin, where we put our spin on your tennis.